Ladies and gentlemen, I ask, thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming. It's the John Thomas Memorial Lecture and Discussion. 16 years ago, John Thomas, Alan Miner, and Richard Dasher came up with the idea of doing an innovation program for that would be hosted by the Japan Society of Northern California. And that program thrives and prospers to this day. And I would encourage you all to mark July 16th on your calendars, which will be the next Innovation Symposium, US-Japan Innovation Symposium here. Now, John was an important leader for the Japan Society. He, after living and working in Japan as a John Thomas retired here in the Bay Area. Many of you know him, I know, and knew him, and joined the Japan Society, where he was a member of the board for more than a quarter century. He was our chair of the board for 6 years, longest tenures in our history, and was frankly one of the important leaders of the Japan Society in the 21st century. The things that he did for the Japan Society has a lot to do with where we are today as a very active and robust organization. And so when he passed away, sadly, 2.5 years ago, we pledged to host a lecture in his honor to discuss issues, and an issue in particular that he was very passionate about, which was innovation in Japan. And this is something that, again, John felt very strongly about. And so we're just delighted to be able to host this program in his honor. So we're here to both honor John and also to discuss this issue that he thought was so important. And I'm particularly pleased that we have with us as the speakers today, Alan Miner and Richard Dasher, who were part of that original idea for the innovations. And more importantly, have been strong and very intense supporters of that initiative in the last 16 years. And frankly, without that support and their efforts, they would not have achieved what we did, which is the symposium is in fact the longest continuously running celebration of ties between Silicon Valley and Japan anywhere in the world. So we're very proud of that and very grateful for the work that Alan and Richard and of course John did to make that happen. So my remarks are very short. I just wanted to thank you again all for coming, and let me turn it over to Richard Dasher for the program. Thank you.
So thanks for coming, everyone. Let me start my slide share. And I think that in honor of John, the best thing we can talk about is what Silicon Valley can and should learn from innovation in Japan. I'm very honored to be able to give this lecture and lead a panel discussion in memory of John Thomas. Larry has said a lot about his background. He was on the board of the Japan Society for 26 years. John was the ultimate mentor because he really cared about the people he mentored. And he was compassionate, he was sincere, he gave really wise advice to all of us, and he was very humble. I think that his interest in innovation reflected an understanding on his part of the US-Japan relationship that really a lot of people didn't have up until that time. And it's a real honor to be able to dedicate this lecture in his memory. So what I want to do is I'll give about 30 minutes of remarks, then we'll have a panel discussion. And at the end of the panel discussion, we should have some time for audience Q&A. After the program is over, this program is part of the Japan-U.S. Innovation Award. One of the sponsors of the award is Japan Society of Northern California. And the society is doing this in cooperation with our US-Asia Technology Management Center at Stanford. So our Stanford Center has a party going on next door that will start about the time we finish up. Please stay and enjoy meeting each other and talking at that point. So first, let's understand about innovation in Japan and the US, then some distinctive features of corporate innovation in Japan, especially looking at the startup ecosystem around innovation, And finally, I have one slide about what Silicon Valley can and should learn from innovation in Japan. Innovation is different from invention. Anybody can have an idea. Innovation is when you use that idea to create new value. Value only happens if someone uses your idea and recognizes the value that you have created. In a market economy, that typically means that you deliver your idea to the market and you get value from it. That means that innovation can be either built a little bit on top of what you've already created, or it can be something radically new. So every year now, if the iPhone 18 is not that much better than the iPhone 17, the stock price goes down. Because we're expecting something every year. Every year, Tesla comes up with some changes in its software or whatever in its model cars. But once in a while, you'll have true radical innovations that go on to disrupt the way people used to do things. This kind of disruptive innovation is often a major source of value. Some of the recent ones, ChatGPT. So that was a pretty different way of doing artificial intelligence from what had been there before. Anyway, not all innovation is about technology. It can be taking an existing product to a new market. It can also be changing your business process or creating a new business model. Innovation is really one of the fundamental characteristics of being human. We're not the strongest animal. We're not the fastest animal. We have survived through history by innovating. So who does innovation? You have to look two different ways. You have to look at who pays for innovation, and you have to look at who does innovation. So in terms of paying for innovation, the further away you are from the market, the more you're looking at a general investment, typically in a country's future. What kind of labor force do you want to have in 20 years? What do you really need for the country to have in order not to be reliant on another country? The best people to invest in that kind of basic technology is the government. And in most of the societies that we know, the group who will actually perform the process of research and eventually transfer it into product development are starting further away from the market, universities and research institutions. But as you get closer into the market, it's all business. So if you look at the total amount of research and development generated in the United States, business generates by far the majority, 75% or so. But basic research mostly is done by the university and government labs. Applied research industry is already taking the kind of leadership role, but by the time you get to product development, it's all industry. Universities are terrible places to try to develop products. We think in terms of when our students will graduate, right? Markets define how companies think about innovation. So what's happened in the last 50 years in the United States is that both the performance and the funding of innovation has really shifted upwards in the industry level. This is an indication of how advanced our technology has become and how innovation dependent the US economy has become. The lines down near the bottom are still, government and university performance. Across countries, it's not that different. The interesting thing about the EU is that the EU actually has a bigger role for government than does the US, Japan, or China. But in the US and in Japan both, 70% of R&D is done by industry in the US and almost 78.5% is done by industry in Japan. So what's happening in these different systems? One of the things you have to remember is that the systems developed around very different approaches to external topics like defense and like industrial development. So in the US, over history, if you could put a picture of a tank or a fighter plane on a slide, you might get money from the DoD to do research in a university. Because the US was investing very broadly in new technology development as a national defense issue. The space race paid for a lot. After the space race, we had the rise of the National Institutes of Health. So multiple agencies are funding national R&D in the US. A typical Stanford professor will have 4 or 5 US government grants that are from different agencies. And managing these different customers is something that the American professors have gotten pretty good at. It's rather rare to have a industrial national project in the United States. Why? It's politically incorrect for the government to give money directly to big companies to do R&D. That kind of subsidy is just absolutely political, no. Most of the funding in the US is clearly bottom up. It's nice to have Stanford on the name of your grant proposal, but it's the proposal that the professor that determines whether they get money or not. In contrast, in Japan, where defense was not something that's really politically correct to fund directly, and this is changing a lot these days, industrial and labor competitiveness were considered national defense issues. So you had METI funding industry labs and MEXT funding university labs. And they were relatively separate from each other for a long time. They're starting to come together now, but national projects, 5-year national projects, 10-year national projects are a standard feature of the Japanese innovation system. Typically, one of these big national projects will start with a benkyokai, a study group, chaired by a senior professor with either METI or MEXT being the secretariat, and the representatives of the major companies who are strong in that technology serving as the members of the benkyokai. What the study group comes up with turns into a national project that's often matched by an industry partnership that will help to administer the money. So industry is cooperating much more closely in the system of national R&D in Japan than it is in the US. And it does tend to be kind of top down, where the status of the researchers tend to have a lot to do with how much money they get. So it's not really surprising that, especially since World War II, innovation, corporate innovation in Japan, which could be companies of any size, are really dominated by large firms. And once in a while, these large firms have demonstrated truly radical innovations that change things. The Sony Walkman, it really took the world by storm. Car navigation systems, one of my least favorite things in the world, QR codes. And emoji. Remember what was that thing? The Tamagotchi, right? The virtual pet. That was something that really there had not been anything like that around. It was quite a radical innovation. The other thing that the Japanese companies have been able to do is extremely long-term innovation, where most American companies would have killed the project years before it would have come to light. A couple of examples. Toray bought the license from DuPont for carbon reinforced plastic in 1971. They didn't make a profit with it until 1997. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't happen in many US companies, right? We had the person who developed passenger side airbags at Honda come and speak in one of our programs at Stanford a few years ago. It took him 16 years And the people directly above him were against the project all this time, but Honda Soichiro wanted to keep the project going. So, this kind of thing is something that Japanese companies have done in the past that is quite remarkable, but it's sort of been eclipsed in all the Silicon Valley boom. Right? The radical innovations that have come out of Silicon Valley since the 1980s and more recently in China have really captured the world. Think about it. We have companies like Apple that are now, the market cap of Apple is bigger than the gross domestic products of all but 6 or 7 countries in the world. So we have generated an amazing amount of what the world recognized as value. Now, Japanese company innovation also is quite famous for management of technology. Our center goes all the way back to 1992. At the time we first started our center, everyone was really interested in Japanese technology management. How did they commercialize things? How did they come up with things like the operating system in, different kinds of computers, or the computer mouse, that kind of thing? There's sort of a spiral flow that you see in a Japanese company where start at the bottom right. What the company already knows is combined with some new area of knowledge. The first thing that has to happen, typically in an R&D group, is you have to make that yours. You have to make this juxtaposition of new and old knowledge something that you have internalized. But then you have to transfer it to a business unit. And if you want to be successful with it, you must do something so that people just won't fade away from it. That kind of a spiral approach to management of technology is quite famous. This book was written in 1994 by Professor Nonaka and Professor Takeuchi. And this was considered one of Japan's real strengths. This was supported by lifetime employment. Now, lifetime employment was a custom. It was never part of the contract that anybody had with a company, but a lot of the people in R&D who first worked on a project would get transferred to the development lab along with the project to actually deliver a product. And then they would be transferred to the business unit, some in manufacturing, some in marketing, and some in sales, for a new idea in the company. Without that kind of tradition of lifetime employment, it was really hard to make this spiral work effectively. There's also a tradition of strong knowledge from the Genba, the people who are actually doing the work in Japan. One other thing that's kind of a distinctive feature of Japanese company innovation is this tradition of technology road mapping. Sometimes this goes too far. Sometimes it makes technology development look like a very standard length to a project process, standard speed to a process, and will kind of miss the opportunity of off-road map technologies disrupting the whole thing. So it can be too much, but one thing you have to say is that Japanese companies have always paid a great attention to the future. In 1988 or 89, I was in the embassy, and one of the section head meetings that the deputy chief of mission would run had to do with Japanese high definition TV. And I remember one of the comments in that meeting was, Sony has a marketing plan all the way for the next 25 years. So Japanese companies have taken a long-term view. And what is this? What are the good things about this? When you come to this lifetime employment versus a very highly mobile labor market, you see a lot of differences. The market for PhDs to go to work in Japanese companies used to be pretty poor. The people who stayed for their PhD in a Japanese university were the people who really wanted to be academics. Everybody else, after they would get their master's, would go to work in a Japanese company on a national project funded by METI and end up doing research that was very similar to what the universities here in the US were doing. When I first got here to Stanford, I found all these relationships between Japanese companies and the researchers in engineering at Stanford, more than there were between the universities and the researchers here at Stanford. But if you're a really good researcher in Japan, the company will let you write up the things you've done for the last 5 or 6 years and put them together into a dissertation. And sometimes within 1 year, a university in Japan will give you what is called a Kigyo Hakase, a corporate PhD. I mean, it's really just a plain and simple PhD. The problem is that these people are not really in the community of the graduate students of what's going on in research at the actual university itself. There's also one final thing about this kind of busy slide is the benefits of having a highly litigious society here in Silicon Valley. We're, Saiban Taikoku, as you say in Japanese, right? A great empire for court cases. And that means that people here do a lot of outside networking because we're all worried about our next job. And we know what we can say. And most companies will make new employees sign statements that they're not bringing anything from their previous company into their new job. That tradition is not quite so well established in Japan, so there is this kind of insecurity around what you can say and what you can't say. I'm expecting a visitor from one of our member companies next week who's very concerned about how Japanese R&D personnel can listen to what startup companies say here without being accused of stealing their ideas. Those are kind of things that are serious questions, but we've kind of worked out the solutions here in the Valley. So I think the challenges for Japan, first of all, we haven't talked about the startup ecosystem yet. That's the next couple of slides. And second, large companies have to know how to not do it all by themselves. They really need to learn to practice something called ambidextrous innovation. You're building on the value you've already created, as well as looking for fundamental new sources of value. So look at Google. Every year it builds on what it's doing. It spends 14% of its annual revenues on R&D. But once in a while, it'll have a totally different project like Waymo that came out of Google, or it will buy a company like Fitbit and make that kind of major new source of value into part of what it's offering to the market. So in a startup company, you really universally, startup people want to change the world, right? They want to improve the world. They're not supporting any existing business. And so what they're really doing has to be somewhat radical, or the big companies will eat their lunch before they can get to market. This means that startups really have to focus around one innovation. They cannot be doing multiple things. But if they are successful, they become big companies, and then they have to change and really develop this kind of approach to ambidextrous innovation. So when you look at the startup ecosystem in Japan, one of the most striking things is a rapid scale up in the number of startups and the amounts of available funding. Yeah, that's the kind of chart we love to see in Silicon Valley, right? Notice that this is the amount of venture capital funding or venture funding. It includes venture capital funding and also angel funding and other kinds of loans to startup companies in Japan. It also shows an increase in the number of deals. Interestingly enough, in the US, there was a huge drop after 2021. So Japan actually has kind of run counter to some of the ups and downs that we've had in the Valley. So a lot of money and a lot more people are involved in startups. There's a lot of young people I talk to students at Japanese universities a lot, and I'm hearing real interest from them in starting companies. A lot of them have their own companies even before they graduated. That did not used to happen. Used to be they would be interested in being an entrepreneur and then go to work for Sony or Toshiba or somebody like that as soon as they graduated. There's also a noticeable increase in the number of non-Japanese entrepreneurs in Japan. A lot of international teams in startup companies now. With regard to capital, one of the distinctive features in Japan is the availability of LP money. If you're a venture capital fund in Japan, there are lots of corporates who want to invest in venture capital. In the United States, about 20 to 25% of all venture capital deals involve money from corporates, right? Operating companies. In Japan, it's a flip. About 75% of all venture capital deals involve money from some operating company, either strategic venture capital or the operating company is a major kind of secondary investor along with the lead Japanese venture capital firm. Japan is also especially kind of unique in Asia in that it has both invention-driven innovation and also problem-driven innovation. Quite a few Japanese startups are really built around advanced technologies and deep tech. Also, you have a great deal of awareness of things like climate change, social needs like the aging population that's driving a lot of innovation in Japan. And Japan actually has very robust early adopter markets, especially in consumer areas, B2C areas. The government has been pushing this for years. The government said it was going to increase the amount of venture capital 10 times in the next 5-year plan. That was about 2022. And they have increased a lot of venture capital. So this infrastructure for startups is much stronger than it used to be. But change the world? That's a great thing for an entrepreneur to say here, but it's kind of scary in Japan. We're going to generate a good, profitable company. And so you have this sort of S curve where startup companies do well, and then once they start to turn a profit, they kind of back off. A lot of exits in Japan are too small to be interesting to the investors here. Still, it's new. So there are fewer serial entrepreneurs in Japan than there are here. The big problem in the labor market is not the absence of entrepreneurs, it's the absence of employee number 45. People who are willing to go to work in startup companies run by somebody else's idea. Here we motivate those people with stock options, we motivate them with a lot of signing bonuses and things like that. And that system is not quite so well worked out in Japan yet. The venture capital industry in Japan is not yet mature. A lot of the partners in VC firms really are kind of more financially oriented. They would much prefer to have a steady, smaller exit from more of their portfolio companies than have a lot of companies that barely return anything and then one that makes everybody deliriously happy. It's also very difficult to get later rounds of funding in Japan. Growth stage funds that focus on Japan, I could name on the fingers of one hand. So that's a very distinctive feature of Silicon Valley. One reason our VC industry is so huge is that so many of the deals now are over $100 million per deal. I think that not only do people need to know about the startup ecosystem, one of my hobby horses is that if you study technical topics at a Japanese university, you can get by your entire education without taking a single course on business. And basic business knowledge is absolutely essential not just for the entrepreneurs, but for anybody who wants to go to work inside a startup company and achieve success that way. So one of the things that Japanese companies are doing is very active open innovation here in Silicon Valley. Ever since the 1960s, a lot of Japanese companies have had technology watchers in the Valley. That whole tradition has evolved into companies that are looking at corporate venture capital relationships, strategic venture capital relationships with startups, also looking at asking startups for proofs of concept, doing joint development with startups. They're looking at the business here as much as they are looking at the technology here now. And, this is modeled here in Silicon Valley. The companies here are really strong at this. They have done this for years. We have a long tradition of how to make this work. But just as a kind of interesting data point, Emiko did a survey from 2016 to 2020. At that time, Japanese firms in Silicon Valley invested 288 yields over $28 billion US. If you divide that by 5, you get an average amount of venture capital invested in Silicon Valley startup companies that's equal to the total amount of venture capital investment in Japan. So the Japanese companies have been interested in this area for quite some time. What are they looking at? They're really looking at how you change this chaotic line at the research phase into a product development line. Somewhere around this transition is where you have product market fit, right? In a company, companies spend 90% of their R&D budgets on development. And that means they want most of that money to generate profit in a year or two. With research to support the D efforts, you really have to look at a much broader range of possibilities. What the US companies are doing, this is where you have big company, startup company relationships. At the D stage is where you actually get the big company buying something that it can use. At the corporate venture capital stage, what the company is doing is investing money so that it can be part of an evolutionary process from the inside. They're buying to watch. They're not buying to own. Corporate venture capital is not direct investment. It's portfolio investment. Almost never would a corporate VC put somebody on the board of one of the portfolio companies. Too much possibility of conflict of interest. So you have that kind of thing going on. And it's difficult in Japan because it's new. Japanese companies think, oh, startup company, great, outsourcing. We've got the contract for that already. And outsourcing is about making your current business more efficient. Open innovation is about creating value in the future. Another problem for Japanese big companies is that their very careful approach to new product development, new product conceptualization takes too long for an American startup company. My daughter was working for a late stage startup company. I was able to introduce her to my contacts at one of Japan's biggest electronics makers. This was about 20 years ago, so I can tell the story. As we're walking out to the parking lot after this, she says, Papa, don't ever do that again. I don't have time for this. Her company had to grow 100% a year, their investment package. She doesn't have time to spend 4 or 5 months working out the perfect deal with a big Japanese firm. So, this kind of, one reason it takes time is that you do have this kind of group dynamics in Japanese companies that gives a lot of power to passive resistance inside the firm. Somebody back home can keep asking questions. And so the innovation group here in the Valley has to keep asking the startup company questions. Time is lost. So, you have that kind of problem that makes open innovation difficult in Japan. But I think that it's a real mistake to miss Japan. What should we be looking at? What should we be learning from Japanese innovation? First of all, Japan has a lot of areas of strength. Some of them are well known. Robotics and physical AI, some areas of biotech like IPS technologies. Japan is a source of deep tech that rivals technology anywhere else in the world. I think also it's worth watching Japan because what you see is typically the output of a high quality process and a lot of integrity. It means a lot to have that reputation in Japan. So how do we pay attention to what's going on in Japan? The first big point for today is do not become so myopically focused on what's happening in the valley that we forget the rest of the world, and especially Japan when it comes to deep tech, when it comes to some leading edge sort of problem-driven innovation as well. The environment for innovation in Japan is also changing. We need to pay attention to that. We need to watch these international teams. The slideshow that was coming on before the program started today. In a couple of weeks, we have a panel discussion here about media and content startups in Japan. One Japanese panelist, two ethnically Chinese panelists who live in Japan. So this is something you're seeing all the time now. Governance is changing in Japan. It used to be that company managers in Japan were punished for committing mistakes, not missing opportunities. I'm afraid those days are gone. And more activist shareholders in Japan are going to demand more innovation from Japanese companies. That gives us opportunities to cooperate with them. I think that the lifetime employment in Japan is not something that would fit here. We have a very mobile, highly mobile labor market here, but there are benefits to the kind of attitudes that people have. I think people tend to own their work in Japan a lot. The entire group will feel ownership. People are, behaving more like partners than they are like employees. And this can lead to great teamwork. So that's kind of what I wanted to say in my opening remarks to give you kind of a view of these two very different systems. To move on, I'm delighted that we have three panelists who I'd like to ask to come up and join me on stage now. So Emiko Higashi is a board director of a number of major US and also Japanese companies. Emiko-san, please. Ray Hatoyama is a venture partner at Sozo Ventures and also was with a company called Human Made. And Human Made just had an IPO and you're the chief strategy officer.
Oh, that is correct, yes.
And Alan Miner, who was one of our co-conspirators in starting the Innovation Awards program. Alan took Oracle public in Japan and he took Salesforce public in Japan and has been a venture capitalist for a number of years. And it's my privilege to cooperate with him in a number of different areas. So let's sit down and have a bit of a panel discussion and then we'll open the floor to audience questions. So as I'm getting set up, Emiko-san, you've seen things from the top level, from the board level of Japanese companies. What do you think about Japanese innovation in regard to the kind of successes that you've seen, the kind of comments that do you agree with my presentation or disagree?
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon. I think I generally agree with what you presented, and thank you. That it's I know that there's a lot behind all these pages of analysis and your remarks. So just to give you a background, because what I'm going to say is just my one person's point of view and based on my personal experience. So it might be difficult to generalize. But I've spent decades so watching Japan from afar, from this side of the ocean. I'm Japanese and I worked in Japan, but in the last probably 15 plus years, I have spent time both being a venture capital sort of fund manager here in Silicon Valley and Tel Aviv, and also serving on corporate boards. And the corporate boards are both in Silicon Valley, Japan, and the one in Japan that I served until this June, I will be, is Takeda Pharmaceutical. And talk about innovation. So Takeda is in 5 different therapeutic areas. When I first, so I've been on Takeda's board, so I'm not at management, but so my comments are from the perspective of the board. But when I first joined, I spoke with the head of the R&D, Andy Plump, who is still head of the R&D. And he and I agreed, the large pharmaceutical companies, whether Japanese or non-Japanese, it's really like a gigantic venture capital fund, right? Because they can't really be doing everything from R to D to commercialization and every drug that they discover. So while they have their own R&D and develop certain drugs, but they have to really also rely on external innovation to come into. So what does it require for the Japanese large corporate that you talked about is to have the platform and environment that is conducive for bringing in the external innovation inside and then not kill it, but to nurture and then partnership and work with with those innovation partners. So I think Takeda has done probably the largest number of those innovation deals among not only Japanese companies, but many of its peers.
Can I kind of comment on that from
Please.
the startup side? If you're starting a company around a compound or a drug, you are probably expecting to be acquired about midway through stage 2 of clinical trial.
Right.
Because the amount of money required for marketing really benefits from the big company's clout.
Absolutely. So there's a model that it's not just Takeda's model, but it's, they are research and then development to phase 1 is typically done by the startups, and phase 2B, when it becomes much more costly to go, commercial, do the clinical trials and then have the go-to-market strategy in the phase 3 and then beyond. All the money has to be spent, and then that's where gigantic pharmaceutical companies have the infrastructure and the know-hows and all that back. So that model, I think, has worked pretty well for Takeda. So if you look at Takeda today, it's in the cusp of announcing, it has announced 3 totally new products that is coming on board to market this year and then next year, of which one of the 3 is acquired assets. And then if you look at beyond, in the next years, there are another 5 compounds that are really in phase 2 and beyond, of which, and again, another 2 of that 5 are acquired, by the way, from China.
Okay.
Right. So, and then the China piece, I think you showed some of the statistics. The speed of, again, this is biopharma, speed in which that development happens, and I'm sure it's not just the pharmaceutical, it's AI and other areas, is just astronomically faster there for a variety of reasons which I don't. But so, yes.
No, that's great for now. We'll come back about some other companies you're working with too. But Ray, instead of, biopharma, you've kind of, made your mark in the B2C world.
Yes.
Right? What is your take on Japanese innovations that have been kind of particularly successful in sort of these new consumer markets?
Yeah, I think there's 2 things inspired with Dasha Sensei's presentation. One is the long-term vision.
Yeah.
I think, and the second is the connection with Silicon Valley. The
Mhm.
first thing about, for example, my example of Hello Kitty, I have operated a Hello Kitty company for 8 years, and the Hello Kitty is 52 years
Yeah.
since its movement. Around that 52 years, there were many times the company or Hello Kitty has market share or the company becoming almost bankrupt. But I think if it was a US company, they just killed the project.
Yeah.
The Hello Kitty probably couldn't have survived in the 70s or the 80s and 90s. They were crisis, but the
Yeah.
company continued to do Hello Kitty. So I think because of the long term. Yeah, they don't give up on property, and so that's why Hello Kitty is Hello Kitty. 52 years it has been surviving. But if it was a Japanese IP that happened, but US IP, it probably has been dead already.
Yeah.
So I think that's the same with Pokemon. Pokemon, like 10 years ago, their EBITDA was like 3 million. They were running out of cash. Like, can you believe it? They make billions of profit right now, but those projects have been just closed if it was US companies. So I think the long-term vision was very
Mhm.
important. And at the same time, I think Silicon Valley is so important for how Pokemon Company, I think, turned around as Pokemon Go. With Google, Niantic, without that, it couldn't have been this global. Connection with Silicon Valley really big up. And I think looking into US technologies, companies, I think a partnership, Japanese company invested more than in their domestic companies. Hello Kitty as well too. When I was doing Hello Kitty, we use social networks, a lot of Twitter, Facebook, and we got fan engagement over there. But I think those two things really changed the destination of Hello Kitty and Pokemon. So I think I was looking back to your presentation saying that this is the kind of innovation Japan was really making through IP and culture, but that was something which was exactly what you mentioned in the slides. Those components are so important for Japanese IP, and that's my experience.
I'm also kind of curious about what you think about what you call IP, characters and, that sort of content from media.
Yes.
That's an area Japan looks really strong in.
Yes, I think the word content and IP wasn't really popular. I think 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I think everybody was talking about trademark, copyrights, or as a semiconductor or like pharmaceutical. But I think in Japan, IP means intellectual property is about a manga. Animation, and I think that's becoming the #1 industry for Japan. So that was, I think, consistent with Japan, with cool Japan concept as well too. It was never a thing, but I think in 20 years, the investment made the whole industry and is #1 category, bigger than car industry right now in Japan. So I think that's consistency is something which Japan is good in innovation. US companies gave up with animation so many years ago, but Japan continued to explore that, and it became an industry.
Okay. Alan, you've been in the B2B world.
Yeah.
And in terms of not only business software, but from your perspective, how do you see Japanese innovation? What's been really successful?
When I give presentations in Japan, I often get this question, why can't Japan do a moonshot type innovation? And my answer is, who cares about a moonshot? Who benefited from the Apollo program? It was the US defense industrial complex. No US citizen benefited other than having a wonderful entertainment association by nationality with the country that got to the moon first. It did not benefit a single citizen's life directly, nearly as much as it benefited. But if you look at the last 50 years in Japan, there are an endless sequence of innovations that make the day-to-day life of the average Japanese citizen so much more convenient, so much better, so much more predictable and reliable. Things like JR, my favorite example is JR introducing the Suica card a year after they had just spent billions introducing magnetic strip paper tickets. And somebody said, well, we could do this without tickets. And so they spent another $1 billion replacing all the things again to introduce digital cash that's now used as the reason why Apple has NFC in its phones is because JR was willing to spend another couple $1 billion just after they had a sunk cost in another excellent. The convenience stores in Japan that every traveler in Japan raves about on Instagram and YouTube, of course, started with 7-Eleven in the US, but every day fresh meals are delivered 3 times a day. Every month, 3 or 4 new meals are introduced. When was the last time you saw a new sandwich in a CVS or a 7-Eleven in the United States? There's something new on the shelves every day that's delicious, conveniently priced, accessible in walking distance of anybody's home and pretty much anywhere in the country now. And so I see the biggest fundamental difference between the way innovation is approached in Japan, the way business is approached in Japan and here, is that if you look at the stakeholders involved in a business, the priority is ranked exactly in reverse. And it's not just long-term vision, it is a long-term commitment to the relationships with the employees who are bottom of the totem pole in the United States. The companies frankly care least about their employees. They care second most about their customers and partners. Then they care about the management and leadership is the second highest here. In Japan, this reverse: employees first, customers second, management third, profits fourth, but profits to build up a cash cushion to survive the next crash and not have to lay off the employees, not have to inconvenience customers. So profits are both short-term and long-term are very important in Japan, but distributing those profits to shareholders in the forms of dividends or stock buybacks, distributing them to management in the form of stock options and stock buyback is the last thing. And that drives a whole attitude toward business priorities, to of course the kinds of innovations that are done and the way the society functions. But I think
I see one common in what all 3 of our panelists mentioned. They're all involved in extremely high demand for reliability and quality.
Yeah.
You know, I think that the Suica card is a great example.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what would happen if 0.5% of the Suica cards didn't swipe correctly?
Yeah.
I mean, this has to be better than network 0.99999 in order for that to be successful. A new drug has to be really good, right? You know, people will not put up with computer games that are glitchy.
Especially if you have to physically put it in a cartridge on a Nintendo, that if you have a bug in the game, you've got to then replace 1 million physical cartridges to all your customers.
Just add to what Alan was saying. I think it's the order of what the stakeholders in important, but also I think Japanese innovation really starts from purpose. Like if it's the sandwich, we're making people, life's more convenient.
Yes.
It starts with a purpose.
Yeah.
And then when the purpose succeeds, then there's money that follows.
Yeah.
Right here, to me, I'm generalizing.
Right.
But money is it seems like
Money.
that's the driver. And then that drives, and then maybe you find the purpose afterwards. I mean, AI is a great example, right? I mean, it's always, anyway.
Yeah.
Don't let me get.
We could spend all day.
AI is a great example because we are all sort of frenzied with AI, but it's like, what is the value and purpose of the AI? And I think Japan, and you probably know, you two know much better about this, about Japan. But I think in Japan, I think you were saying that AI in Japan is not scary or
Yes.
Yeah.
and then because there's a purpose to what people are thinking about how we do it. Where here it's kind of like, well, everybody's on the AI boom, and then there's so much money behind it, and the market cap is going up. This week and next week it's gonna be all these IPOs. So it's just like money that is driving or chasing, and then purpose is after that.
Yes. Yeah, I think AI is part of the culture and it's part of the animation manga culture as well too. So for example, good example is Doraemon. Doraemon is like exactly what AI shows, but it's not Terminator. That's how US vision as an AI. So it's threat. Doraemon is something that it help your life.
Yeah.
So I think those kind of the culturally embedded things or how to employ the technology quite different, and that's embedded, I think, culturally and from you when you're kids. So I think that's something really different.
Yes.
Well, I kind of gotta ask, why does Japan innovation not have more respect in the US?
I would argue that it's starting to. I think it depends on, I think, what area you are. I think, well, if you're thinking about AI investment, I think none of Japanese government or corporate can really follow that. But if you think about the mission or the cultural part, I think many people are right now following. Kawaii culture is one good example. Like food, like sushi as well too. And I think Sushi Jiro is a good example. Like he only serving one restaurant. He's not interested in serving 5 or 6. So if you think about expansion, I think then US is very strong. Meanwhile, if you want something unique, culturally embedded, since we don't have this feeling about you need to grow so fast and big, I think there's something special is always there in Japan. And that's, I think, part of this specialty we have. For human made is a good example. Bar as well too. There's something that is uniqueness, which doesn't really go apart. And I think that's Japanese culture, and that's one of the strengths we have.
I think as living creatures, not just us, but all living creatures are wired to pay attention to quick movement and big threats. And the attention, the moonshot is a great example of that. The incredible amount of money that's being wasted on AI models right now is a great example of that. So America is great at moving really fast with really big things that command attention. And Japanese innovation is someone like Sushijiro. We were talking earlier about Shohei Ohtani and how he lives in his imperfection. He is never satisfied with what he did in his last game. He always believes sincerely and deeply he can do better. And when people applaud him and cheer for him, it's like, I'm not yet at the peak of my game. Or his humility towards other players, his openness. So he is such a quintessential example of not just Japanese values, but I think of Japanese innovation. The Japanese innovation, it's slow, it's small, and step by step. And then 10 years later, you can buy a green tea on the top of Mount Takao with your Suica card. And America, our obsession with only paying attention only to the fast moving, only to the big. I can't imagine any American company having the patience or getting the funded that it would need to have vending machines, drinks at the top of hiking trails that you could pay for with your train ticket, with your taxi pass, or with a train with a New York subway token.
Emiko, you have some comments, I think.
Well, so I'm, this is part projecting my hope in this comment, but I think the sort of US, the fast moving, bigger thing, which I also add to what Alan said, optimizing everything, right?
Yeah.
So optimizing fast, quickly get point A to point B fastest, or what is the question I always ask. But so that's, if you characterize that as American sort of mode, and especially in Silicon Valley, I think we are seeing some breakpoints, right? I mean, you look at the, I don't know, the graduation hasn't happened at Stanford yet, but anybody who mentioned it, anybody who mentioned AI in a commencement speech at many universities got booed. So there are forces at work. I think humans, sort of starting to feel is the speed and the optimization, and bigger, the better, the more value, the better, whatever. Is that really making us more purposeful and living a life of human being? I think people are starting to question. So
Yes, my company is in human.
Yes,
Yes, exactly.
it's like,
Right.
you know, like there's a culture and a society and an economy that thrives in different sort of value system. And I think Japan is doing a great job in doing that. But I think if I look at METI and then how they try to sort of entice people to come to Japan and make investments, foreign investment in Japan, I think there's still a lot more room for them to advertise and market and then also go out.
Especially in this, attracting foreign investment into Japan, you've got these two wheels that move at different speeds.
Yes.
You've got the US wheel moving fast and kind of being a little bit shaky, and the Japanese wheel that is very well put onto the axle, but moving at a slower speed. If you're in an American startup company and one of the Japanese innovation outposts here contacts you and says, we're really interested in what you have, what does it take to be successful? Emiko, why don't you go first with that one?
For that startup company here,
For the startup company here.
yeah, it's almost like, so as you said, you move with the different speeds. Because if you say, oh, I agree with Japanese way, and then you start and then your shareholders or investors will
Your
start.
investors are not happy.
Right. So maybe I'm thinking out loud, but maybe there are ways to sort of decouple the speed and have a Japanese partner, presumably some corporate partners, can sort of partner with you in that speed, maybe, not 2.0, but in the 1.0 speed, while you're still running 2.0 speed here in the US, but being able to bring in some of the way of thinking and better, sort of deeper, sort of longer runway of your technology. I don't know, I mean.
Is it worth it?
Is it worth it?
Yeah.
It
I mean,
depends on
think
who.
about it. You've got your investors pushing for 100% of your growth.
It depends on who your stakeholder is. If the
Okay.
investor is, and then they're gonna pull your money out, or you can't really raise the next round because you didn't grow at 100%. That's a reality, and I wouldn't necessarily tell that company to go be patient with the Japanese. But if you have more patient investors, certainly, because building that trust, taking the time to build that trust in first couple of years, pay off a lot. I've met so many Silicon Valley entrepreneurs who are my generation who still speak about their partnership with Japanese corporations, 30 years ago, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And then that trusting relationship last
Change their
generations,
lives, too.
change their lives, and then follow them in different, careers or different companies that they started up again and again.
Yeah.
So I think it's a long-term.
Ray, you kind of live in this space
Yes.
with Sozo Ventures,
So the
right?
ventures, yes, I think there's a couple things I can say from my experience. Don't think about 5 years, but if you think about 30 years
Yeah.
or 50 years, what happens? I have been board of Yahoo Japan, and Yahoo USA is almost gone, but Yahoo Japan is still there. Like we talked about 7-Eleven. 7-Eleven parent company became US company. Before for Sozo Venture Apps, I helped like Twitter's, Square, Palantir, Applied Intuition. Those companies going to Japanese market, and they have definitely their shares are over there as well too. And if you just think about 1 to 3 years, maybe it didn't move. But if you think about like 10 years, 20 years, or even 50 years, the market cap, the value is there. So I think once again, long-term vision. They put importance on this longevity. So not 1 to 3 years of making profit or surviving. It's quite different way of thinking, and innovation is there to support in Japan as well.
Alan, I'm going to turn the question around for you because one of our viewers on Zoom has asked what a Japanese company should do to make their Silicon Valley outpost successful. How you set it up so that the Japanese company here, trying to interact with these crazy American startups can be successful.
It's actually a hard one.
Yeah.
Well, the The easy way for Japanese CVC to get attention from a startup here is to keep hitting the rounds and let them know you're willing to invest in their next round, whatever valuation their VCs demand. So that's an easy way. So it could be foolish. I think it's very, in my experience, it's very difficult for the people assigned here to Silicon Valley. They quickly learn how rapidly decisions need to be made here, what interesting opportunities they are. But I think the hardest challenge that those teams have is that in the same way that the American startups have difficulty adapting to the more organizational, gradual, predictable, relationship building high integrity relationship with the headquarters needs, the people who are assigned here get frustrated for the same reason. They were sent over to make something happen quickly from headquarters, and yet when they try to engage, they can't get headquarters to move as quickly as they don't need to. So I think actually the biggest advice I would give to someone assigned here is to have a pipeline back to the CEO at headquarters. Headquarters have the CEO handpick the leader of the team here, and to be in regular communication with the CEO, and to have the CEO come over from time to time to meet with the startups. Yeah. When I've been bringing Silicon Valley companies into Japan, every time that the point person has been the head of global sales, it's been every time the main point person is the CEO and supported by the head of product development with a reporting relationship as long as if you have the relationship to the top where you know that when issues arise, you can escalate to the top. And when issues with product arise, you can communicate with the persons in charge of product, then that works. So I would recommend to have a relationship with a key person in the product side, a key relationship with the CEO, and know that the people, the Silicon Valley that are going to want you to talk to are your salespeople, but how you navigate the friction between Silicon Valley companies wanting to get customers right away in Japan, and thinking that the way to get a customer is to talk to the CEO that way you hear, not knowing that you can get good customer relationships and deep and more long-lived ones by dealing with the young people in their 30s and 40s who are still going to be with the company 30 years from now, rather than the CEO is going to be retired to it. So a different approach to sales, but I think they're in a difficult spot unless they come over with a personal relationship with the CEO that they can, when needed, to engage at that level.
For those of you who think that doesn't sound
And
realistic, I know some.
I think that's why Takeda has been so successful here.
Right.
Is Hasegawa-san
Yes.
is regularly in
And
direct
he
interaction.
understood the dynamics.
So one more quick question from Zoom. What does anybody on the panel think about A16Z opening an office in Japan? Is that meaningful?
Good luck.
I think yes, Ben has been really active over there. I think he had many small to big meetings. I think it was last week, and his connections to Japanese government, to I think individual family office, it's quite wide. So I think at least I think Japanese I think entrepreneur or CEO, whatever it is, I think they will benefit from what Ben can bring in. And at the same time, I think the market is small. I think it's unfortunately, for example, HumanMade, we did the IPO right now, $800 million US, and it was a big IPO, but it's still small. It's it's smaller than seed right now happening in AI. So what can you say? But we didn't do any funding, and I think so. I think it's okay for operation, but if you're a venture capital and want to make 100x, 200x, it's likely not to happen in Japanese market. It's just too small. So I think good luck on that.
Yeah.
But Japan will benefit from those money, I think technology, knowledge, but as a venture capital, I don't know.
We're getting short on.
I think Berkshire Hathaway
Yeah.
will make a lot more money.
Yeah.
and will be there a lot longer. They'll be engaged with Mitsubishi, Mitsui Sumitomo, and Itochu and Marubeni for 50 years. And they own 10% of Japan's innovation core. The trading that when I started Sunbridge in 2020, people say, well, there's no venture capital. I said, no, you don't understand. There's a huge startup ecosystem embedded in every single trading company. They hire the best and brightest young people. When they have a great, they send them all over the world to find new ideas, new opportunities. They're globally connected more than any startup ecosystem. Though that is, in my mind, the world's premier startup innovation ecosystem, even today.
Thank you
Even-
very much. I
even
used to
compared
be in Mitsubishi
Yeah,
Corporation.
and Warren Buffett figured that out
Right.
10 years ago, sold his Apple shares, sold his BYD shares, and in his final shareholder meeting, it's well known, quite famous, that he said, I can't imagine us selling we want more than 10% of the trading. I can't imagine us selling any of those shares for 50 years. So
we're running short on time. Let's take maybe one question from the audience. Does anyone have a point? Go ahead.
Thanks, great presentation and talk. Richard, you showed that the source of funding is very similar between US and Japan. And yet the approach to research is very, it's opposite. So I'm just curious to understand, how do you convince the board? Is the board governance different? Is it not shareholder wealth maximization? Is it something else?
Convincing of a board to do some innovation
Yeah, and fund that research.
or to fund the research.
In 30, 50 years.
How would they convince you, Emiko?
Are you talking about the startup companies or are you talking about the public companies?
These are listed, I would imagine, yes.
So, so if your question is if the funding source is similar between US and Japan in the venture capital world, I think if you're making a distinction between the government versus business, yes, but I think as Richard said, that the VC of the Japan are a lot more corporate VCs as opposed to institutional LPs that are funding VCs here, which are institutional investors, right? So I think there's a little bit of a difference there. And each company which has investment from the VC fund who has the board, which by definition has the VC which controls if they control the company, they may not, but they are the one that's controlling. So they tend to have more in the US, short-term horizon, as Alan was saying, even I think VCs in Japan, whose LPs are more corporate, they are probably more patient. I mean, I probably can't speak.
they're not, unfortunately, the VC industry in Japan copied the US business model of 10-year funds. And so they feel the same pressure to be out of all their deals within 10 years that the trading companies don't, the corporate direct investments in Japan don't have the same pressure. But unfortunately, the VC model copied the 10 years and you're done approach to funds.
I have a quick anecdote about that. A few years ago, I went with a new VC fund to go around and raise LP money in Japan.
Yeah.
We went to 15 different CEO offices of major Japanese companies in a week. It was an incredible schedule. The dominant impression I got is that everyone wanted to innovate as long as they didn't have to change anything. So I think the first thing is at the board level, you have to convince people that their company 5 years from now, 10 years from now, is not going to be exactly the same company that it is now. The competition is going to be different. The kind of focus of the company will naturally evolve. You need to keep up. If you can get that message to the board, usually you can have some sort of traction. I'm afraid we're about out of time. Please join me in thanking our great panelists. Let me suggest you just stay here. And Steve, I think you've got some closing comments. Yep. This is Steve Pollock, the president of Japan Society of Northern California.
Well, thank you, Richard and panel. That was a fantastic session. I'm sure John would have loved every minute of it. And thank you all of you for coming and joining us today. So how many of you have been to some of our Japan Society programs in the last year? Good. It's good to see we have a lot of regulars here. Well, we have a lot more coming up. And so this is just a taste. I hope you'll be able to make our Innovation Awards program on July 16th, which will be here at Stanford for the 16th year. A very exciting program that's coming together. But we have a lot of other things we do too. So you'd like to study Japanese. We currently have probably close to 400 students studying Japanese with us. We have private lessons that you can sign up for, get a tutor to help you with your Japanese. We have group lessons that start every few months. And so I encourage you to check that out. And we have a lot of other programs that we do too across a range of topics and segments, from healthcare to innovation, technology, business is a kind of a core area. We also do a lot of arts and culture programming. In fact, we have a number of things coming up soon. We have a film series that we're collaborating on at a new cinema in Japantown just at the end of this month. We have a program on diamond diplomacy, a documentary about US and Japan baseball connections over the years and kind of how that has led to and reflected US-Japan relations. That's coming up on June 9th, a screening and a talk with the director and producer of that show in San Francisco at the Public Library. And we have a program on Japanese metalwork, so traditional master craftspeople. So on the other side of contemporary innovation, I think there are a lot of roots in Japanese culture, and especially master craftspeople that exist in greater number in Japan than any place else in the world, and probably in all other places in the world. There are more in Japan. But the number of those people is dwindling. And so we have put together a whole series of programs about different kinds of craftspeople and things that they're doing. There's an online program coming up on June 2nd. And then we have other things coming up too: Wagyu and Sake Party, World Cup viewing party, and lots of other things to look forward to. So I hope you'll be able to join some of us at those events. Many of them are free, although for ones that involve food, we usually have to charge an attendance fee. Anyway, I'd like to thank again all of our panelists for coming today. A really phenomenal program, just a taste of our innovation agenda. And so I encourage all of you to get involved in whatever way you'd like to, and look forward to seeing you at more of our events coming up. So thank you, Richard. Thank you, Emiko, Ray, and Alan. And we'll talk to you at the reception.
Thanks, everybody.